All right, guys, so we're in for a shoulders and leg day. Odd combination, but typically we start this session with 7 sets of shoulders, a little bit of tricep work, and then we jump into the leg day. It's gonna be kind of similar to our full leg day in the past. We've just moved some of the work into Wednesday session. Super excited. We've got the crew here with Nick and Tony. Nick is about 9 weeks out, so really kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it and ready to rock. All right, guys, so seated hamstring curl. One of the ones you'll probably commonly hear is just aligning the knee to the cam or the axis of rotation here, which is this red dot on the machine. When you set into it, a couple of things to consider. One is toe position. We want to be pulling that toe up towards the shin. And then the other is going to be positioned within the seat. So a lot of you guys like to push back over the back of the seat or pull yourself way forward over the top of the front. In my opinion, for maximal output, both are pretty poor positions. The pushing back over the back of the seat being hip rotation, pulling forward being active insufficiency. So when we look at setting into it, we lock it in, we push into this, but we don't let ourselves expand over the seat. And that's gonna be the setup as we drive the knees forward and up into the pad for the best seated hamstring program.
Eight, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Nope.
I can't even remember if I tried.
9, come on. 10.
This one's mine.
Take it, I'm not gonna take it from you. 11. Come on, man, get it again. Go. Your bar. That's it. Good. Yeah, good set.
2, baby. I don't think I should go that many down. I would think I would add this down 1 extra one. Oh, it was good though.
Come on, man, take it.
No, sir.
15. Take one. Come on. +5, +4. I need some of that trend.
2, 3, 4, 5, 11, 12. Give me 2. Spot.
Probably got a little bit more in there.
Oh, good spot. Good spot. Wow, that lit my hamstrings up. Such a good piece. Such a good piece. So typically you would hear us talk about not starting legs with a seated hamstring curl. With our hamstring work on the other day, it makes more sense here than in the other position. So we're keeping it in as the first movement for legs of the day. Just from on the other day, we wouldn't want to train a lengthened hamstring before we RDL. So we do a lying hamstring curl to get it in the shortened position before we hinge. Come on, man.
Come on, baby. Huh.
Come on, man. Come on. Let's go.
Good reps, let's go.
Come on. Come on. 4, 5. Come on.
Come on, Meg, push.
Come on. 6. Come on.
Breathe. Drive, let's go.
Come on, Meg. 8. Come on, Meg. Come on. Come on. 9.
Go.
Fast.
Easy.
That was fast.
Come on, again.
Go, Matt, go.
Yep. 1. Take it. Take
Go
it.
one.
Take it. Come
Last one.
Let's go.
on. Come on. Drive. Yours.
Drive, let's go.
Yeah, rack.
Back. Oh. You're in.
I try to lower it.
You went back down too fast.
I know. I'm good.
All right, so the question is should you be squatting? And then if the answer to that question is yes, what kind of squat pattern should I be doing? Essentially, all that boils down to is answering some of the questions around what can you do on one leg, what can you do without load on your back, and then what can you resist at the extreme ends of the range of motion, which for squatting is going to be the bottom of the squat. And if we have an understanding of where we're at objectively within that, we can start to choose the squat pattern that fits us the best. So, for example, for myself right now, I'm safety bar squatting. There's a couple things that are going into that. As far as how much dorsiflexion and internal rotation I have at the femur, a barbell squat does kind of put me into a little bit more of a bias of hip away from the bar. And with the amount of shoulder volume I have right now, cranking myself under a bar is going to take away from my upper body session. So the squat pattern looks better on a safety bar for me. And I have the resiliency to be able to resist force in the bottom. But that's not everyone, right? And we have like iterations across that. So we're going to kind of start to go through some of the ones today that could be options on the table. The base testing pattern is always your barbell squat to test like how good you are. And then you do the iterations back from there. So for most people, what they have in gyms, like the iterations start at barbell, go back to safety bar, and then we're going to start talking about squat patterns that aren't internal stability, but rather external stability, which are machines. So we'll kind of walk you through some of those options today and why we may choose some of those other ones.
Don't fuck this up.
Come on, man, I'm with you. Solid reps, come on. Stay close.
Yeah, no, I
This is
know.
a pretty big motion.
Yeah, no.
Come on.
If he drops it, we're grabbing it.
Yeah. Come on. We're with you. Let's go. Come on, homie.
Oh!
Yeah, buddy. Let's go. Come on. Yep. Come on.
Run it.
Breathe. Focus on your breathing. Good. Come on. Easy. Good. Breathe.
Oh!
Come on. Be patient. 7. Yours. Breathe. And go. 8. Come on. Breathe. Be patient. Be patient.
Come on, Nick.
Go. Yep.
Let's go.
Drive.
Ah!
Back. Come on.
Dig.
Take it.
Ah!
Your bar.
Rush,
You're in.
you touch that?
Just like a smidge.
Ooh, that was.
I was like, your pace slowed so fast, I was like, I'm not letting it.
That was whoa.
That was whoa.
That was a whiteout.
So typically the next place in the iterations would be a Smith squat because it's a guided path, but you still have to organize your pelvis relative to your rib cage. The step from there would be a hack squat, and specifically with this Atlantis hack squat, you actually have a couple iterations on this piece, which is a good and a bad thing. The Atlantis hack, what happens is this back pad actually comes forward where it puts your hips back relative to where your rib cage is, simulating a hips first squat. So it's actually taking you out of what the base pattern of a hack squat be which is driving that knee over the toe with the flat back pad. And then each easier variation would be accommodating for your lack of access of range of motion as you pulled that back pad up. So it's a great piece. I do think it's a crutch for a lot of bodybuilders, moving that seat up or moving that back pad up. But it is a step in the iterations that we go through.
Come on, Tony.
Good. Big breath on the way down. Good.
Come on, Tone.
Nice.
Come on, Tony. Big rep. Come on, man.
Nice.
Easy work. Come on. Yeah, buddy.
Focus
way
on
more.
two.
Come on. Stay in it. Drive. Easy. Come on. One. Take it. You got it. Drive.
One.
Take one. Take one. Come on.
Again!
Don't be a bitch. Come on. Drive. Finish it. Right.
How many was that, you know?
I did not count.
Come on. You squatted this 100 times. Let's go.
Whoa! Up! Yeah, buddy. Whoa! Whoa! All right.
How those look? Very last a little bit. Not bad. Still trying to get my confidence back, but getting there. Squatted at 100 times. 101 now. A little bit of a knee tweak in the UK has had me a little hesitant here, but I'll be able to attack it soon. I got about 35 more pounds to get back to where we were working pretty well. So once I finish dieting, it'll jump up pretty quick.
What?
Focus, come on, man. I'm with you. Come on. Big work. Yeah, easy. 2, 3. Four.
Let's go, Nick.
Aim this.
5. Easy. 7. Come on.
Let's go, Nick.
5. Easy.
One.
Right.
One. Fucking pussy.
You're fine. It's just sitting on the wrist. Good stop. Good stop.
Whoa. 1,000. Whoa. 1,000. Whoa. 1,000. Whoa.
1,000.
Whoa.
Take control. Let's go.
Got Luke.
Focus. Focus. Drive. Wow, yeah, buddy. Come on. Hey, more.
One.
Deep
Let's
breath.
go.
Drive. Nice. That was fast.
Hey, that was fast.
There you go.
Read that like a book.
Oh, you're at 8. 8 showing.
Good reps here, come on. Good. Yeah. Come on, come on, come on. Drive. Easy. Good work. Good work. Come on. Come on. Easy. Got one. Come on. Talking about that big energy.
I'm all about that.
That's not what it said on the song. Why they started me? Fast.
Come on.
That's it. What do you want, Tony? How many is it? 16? Holy fuck.
That song came on, I was like, yes.
I played beside.
That was good shit.
We got up.
This with a little more upper body.
Control.
Drive. Take one. Come on, man. Let's win.
Oh, yes.
Fuck. You want to listen to an idea of mine? It's a suggestion. Let's not do quad extensions today and just stick to the sets on Wednesday. It's a great idea. You were 5.5 pounds above your weight on Saturday. There would be higher quality sets. It'd be the same volume across the week.
Whoa.
We have chicken and
Oh, that shit on there. From the shoulder all the way to the pelvis. The problem with an anterior pelvic tilt is your pelvic diaphragm, which is just your pelvic floor, is now pointed in this direction, and now your rib cage no longer stacks with the pelvic diaphragm. Where this is pointed this way, this is pointed this way, the pressure that the core musculature or the core central portion of the can that is the regulator to force production at the distal is now broken, right? Which is why you feel excessive pain here. You probably catch a lot of adductor pains, possibly patellar pain. So if we're able to, think of it like this. Think of
aluminum can, right?
Right.
If I take a box cutter and I cut an aluminum can, is it easier to squish?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what you're doing with excessive anterior pelvic tilt. So the question is not, are you training a quad? Are you training a full range of motion? The question is, are you training maximally through a full range of motion?
Right.
And the answer to that is no. No matter how you argue that, there's no way that you can create more pressure with an excessively anterior pelvic tilt, because there's no way for the structures that attach to the rib cage to translate to here. That's why we have the anterior oblique sling. Everything that happens from here all the way down to the opposite adductor.
Why is there no way for it to translate?
Because you can't create as much pressure off the central hub that regulates how much force production you get off the distal structures.
Yeah, like when I feel like that's gonna depend on the actual movement that you're talking about. Like I get the whole stacking and stuff, but
It's not.
let's say
The only
let's say you
differential
take
would be
yourself-
the movement decides how much hip travel relative to knee flexion that's going to be. In each iteration off of a back squat, theoretically, if you go in the right direction, lowers the amount of hip travel relative to the, and the movement that you choose is the one that allows you to not excessively tilt the pelvis
Are you gonna feel
at
that
the bottom.
differently with low feet placement versus high feet placement?
Yeah, so then that would change it too, right? So like the person who hack squats with a high foot position and the knee travels back towards them is actually the anterior pelvic tilt
going, yeah, down, okay.
that's going this way.
Yeah.
So, or sorry, the posterior pelvic tilt.
Yeah.
So the person that does that would want to create a setup that lowers their foot position so that we no longer lose the pressure of the tin can with excessive
Right.
pelvic tilt. That's my main argument. It's not that it doesn't train it through a range of motion. It takes it through arbitrary range of motion that's not beneficial, and it also becomes a regulator for force production. So that's my main problem. It's like, if you see the bottom of a squat and you see excessive pelvic motion, that's a problem. It's a major problem.
Past 90 degrees.
And it's not even like 90 degrees is the
I
rule
do
of
agree with
thumb.
that.
Like a lot of people squat past 90 degrees without excessive pelvic tilt. It's possible. This is where the individual case happens. She's a great example of this. She can squat straight up and down, but her pelvis, it travels to that end range and never comes back. Never comes back this way.
Yeah.
But she's able to keep her
I feel like a lot of times
hip
when I
structure
think
and her
people
pelvic
especially-
diaphragm
It's like super exaggerated.
above or below her actual diaphragm, create the pressure and exert force. When you pelvic tilt, like the ability to stabilize the pelvis lowers, it's got to go somewhere. It's going to go to the adductor. The adductor is going to try to stabilize the pelvis. This is where you catch adductor pings and patellar pings.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I do agree. I think that like I've personally even experienced that, especially on regular squats, where I would cue myself, you know, to have my butt back, and I would get like a lot of excessive kind of anterior pelvic tilt, and I would always feel like a lower back pump, right? And I've noticed that whenever I set up, it's all about how I set up, like what you're talking about, like having that pad there forcing me to engage my glute. If I don't engage my glute, right, like if I go here and I start, you know, with my butt backwards, you'll notice that I start getting into that posterior pelvic tilt at the bottom. But when I get into that kind of flex position and I stack it, then it goes away.
This is where like someone your size would probably be horrendous under a barbell.
Yeah.
Because
That's why it's all-
the amount of external rotation you have to get here,
Yeah.
the only way you get here is if you do this,
Yeah.
which now is the same thing as doing this.
Right.
Right? It's misaligned.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
so if you have these with these short pads, how do you counteract that?
Stacking yourself. I'm
For
not.
me, it's being more conscientious of actually squeezing my glute at the top and not
Yeah, but
letting me
what is?
So instead of being
So here's
flat back,
another
you're up a
problem.
little bit?
What does squeezing your glute do? It's a lot of time outward foot pressure, which
Yeah.
limits your femur's ability to internally rotate, which is necessary for depth in a squat.
I would argue the opposite.
No,
External
there's no way. If we look at gait cycle,
allows you to open
we have
up.
everything from early stance to mid stance to late. Everything we train is in mid stance, flat foot. For this femur to internally rotate, that big toe has to drive down for us to be able to find access to depth without compensating elsewhere.
I have to externally rotate to get all the way down.
It's a movement issue. It's not optimal. This is where adductor pings, patellar pings, excessive pelvic tilt, that's where all of this comes from. Because bodybuilders think I hit a front relax on stage with foot pressure on my outside of my foot, that must be how I squat, but it's not, because if we actually look at the structures from the foot to the ankle joint all the way up to where the femur inserts onto the hip, There is no way that external rotation from a foot pressure standpoint allows for more depth unless we drive more torque through the knee, which is the opening of the knee socket, and now misaligns the pelvis again.
Well, that's like saying that you can't get more depth, like you can get more depth by internally rotating.
If you have access to it.
And
That's the caveat.
What do you mean by access to it?
So the ability for that femur to move in internal rotation as you descend. Foot pressure should go from heel, maybe a little outside, to as you descend, you push the big toe down and it moves to midfoot, so that as knee travels over the toe, which knee and hip should move at the same time, that femur allows for internal rotation that keeps the foot pressure in your midfoot for maximal force transfer into the floor, instead of here, which is a tripod foot, which limits your force exposure into the floor.
I think that's from like kind of a limited functional anatomy point of view, but I don't think you're taking into account the actual like torque and force vectors that are going on from more of a transverse plane sort of point of view. Have you heard of are you familiar with Dr. Stuart Kelly? He wrote Becoming a Supple Leopard.
Yeah, I've read the book.
Yeah,
I have it on mine.
I mean, he's a big proponent of basically, he talks about that, like the stiffness of a towel and how creating torque and screwing your feet into the ground allows external rotation of the femur and thus more torque and more tension of the acetabellum. That makes more sense to me, because if I'm internally rotating, I'm gonna be internally rotating my femur, which is gonna then make me hit my iliac crest sooner, because now my acetabellum is internally rotated here, and that'll actually force me into a posterior pelvic tilt, because my femur
No,
is going to
because
be
now
hitting
you're
my
looking
iliac
at it
crest.
from a viewpoint of pelvic motion is guaranteed within that from a preset position. Because in order for you to actually reach depth with optimal midfoot pressure, internal rotation has to happen. It's basic gait cycle mechanics. Your foot starts with heel strike, slight supination. As you put the foot down, it goes into pronation, internal rotation, and then as you step off the toe off, it goes back into supination. Where do we
You're not even
operate in?
supposed to heel strike first. If you look at runners, they actually go for even.
Running and walking are two different things, though. Yeah, that's called nailing the hammer, right? You're here and you strike down. That's running. That's not how we operate from optimal force output into the ground. Two different things, right? You can't take athletic mechanics and transfer it into everything that happens on 2 feet flat on the floor. That's not.
You can't.
That's the same thing as you wearing your elevated shoes.
That's
bro.
why squats make a runner
It's
more
not,
powerful.
because the
it
elevated
does
shoe compensates for the dorsiflexion lack of ability,
But you're toe heavy.
but it keeps me in midfoot. Because if I drove knee over toe on a flat foot, I would be here. So it's putting pressure under my midfoot, where now when I push it to the floor, it's going through here because of the heel elevation, not through here, right? So it's just a compensation for a lack of access that I have. Another thing too is if we look at joint structures from a dorsiflexion standpoint, external foot pressure drives the ankle bone to actually hit the talar bone here, which limits the amount of dorsiflexion we can have if I'm on the outside of my foot, where if I'm here, I can drive it into more dorsiflexion, allowing the ankle
You're
structure.
internally rotated. Now you're hitting the talus bone, which is a bigger limiting factor.
No, it's on the outside of the foot. If you externally rotate, this ankle
Yeah, so
bone is going to strike
Right.
this foot bone right here. It's going to limit the amount you can drive over the knee.
If you internally rotate, you're going to now cause your tibia to start hitting your talus bone right here, and that's what's going to do. That's going to be making you more prone to actually collapsing your arch, which is going to lead to all those sort of stacking issues that you're talking
With
about.
those shoes, there's no way you're collapsing your arch though. That's
With
different.
these, yeah, well, with these shoes, the whole point of these shoes, look at Olympic weightlifters. When they wear these shoes, they're externally rotating hard.
But where do they
That's how
transfer
get
force
that.
back into the floor? Go back to the bottom. Where do they transfer force back into the floor? Every Olympic weightlifter moves their knee back in under the hip socket to transfer force to the floor and come back up.
Well, they do both. They get hip extension and then they move their hip back. They have to
It's-
do both simultaneously.
It's a structural presentation that allows them to exert more force to the floor.
Right. I mean, we'll just have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Honestly. 'Cause
Okay, for me, I just want to see though.
saying is
You're
just
talking
like-
about stacks. I just want to see what that looks
Yeah, so it's like
'Cause I have
create
that-
pressure with the central.
with my ass hanging off the bottom, I have that issue all the time.
With the see, this is the problem with this, right? Because where do you relax into?
Yeah.
Pelvic tilt, right? So this would be where you need to really excessively keep yourself here.
So when you lock your shoulders in, it's not at the bottom of the pad, it's at the
It's
hip.
not going to be. Ideally, it would be, but the problem with this is
allowed.
you would do this if this extended where you wouldn't automatically go here. Yeah.
So you do it kind of like at a 20-degree angle or something.
It's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. The differential is the artificial range of motion that's created with the excessive pelvic tilt is now a rate limiter for force output, which mechanical tension is your greatest hypertrophy stimulus, which is where I make the argument that anything from a static tin can perspective and choosing the pattern that allows you to stay in midfoot and not have excessive pelvic tilt, there is always going to be motion. It's not that you eliminate it.
Right.
Will be
Try to control it.
the greatest from a force production standpoint. You'll maximize the range of motion of the tissue that you're trying to train, and then
But there's really no way either one of us can really know that, because it's not like we can actually substantiate those claims. In all reality,
you can.
I mean, you
it's
can.
just basic structural anatomy
can-
and how it works.
But that's the problem. Structural anatomy is only a limited viewpoint in biomechanics. When you get into advanced, and you know more than me with that because you have a master's, but I know when you get into advanced biomechanics, functional anatomy only takes you so far, right? Like
Yeah,
you have
but-
to look at things from.
But you also made the comment that, like, as long as you're getting knee over toe, you're getting quad tension. That's from a 2-dimensional standpoint. That's not biomechanics.
It's not as long. Not,
And it
not
should
the
be
only
3-dimensional.
prerequisite. I think it's a big prerequisite to determine that.
I would
But I
argue
think that
that
what
there's-
allows you to give.
there's a spectrum.
Right, exactly. I think that like what you're saying would certainly apply to some people.
This is
and-
where we're missing
and
each other.
others.
I think. Tell me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
My spectrum lands here.
Uh-huh.
Your spectrum lands here.
Maybe, yeah.
And the amount of compensation you're allowing. All I'm saying is I strive to drive the maximal mechanical tension stimulus without compensatory patterns.
Right.
All you're doing is still progressive in nature over time. It's just the range in which you allowed yourself to compensate is not here, it's here.
Right.
Which, if we theoretically look at how the body functions, may be a rate limiter on your force production.
I would argue that like because I would say what maximizes my eccentric lengthening of the muscle is what's going to be my best bet in actually getting the most mechanical tension, right? Because we want to get the most lengthening of that muscle that we can.
Yeah.
If I limit myself within a structure here without any compensation, and let's say that stops me and makes me go parallel, whereas if I allow myself to open up a little bit and get a little deeper, now I'm able to get a bigger, eccentric.
The problem here is the fact that the other keeps you at parallel. My argument would be you need to fix the problem to keep you from going to parallel in that setup. It's not the setup problem, it's the functional presentation problem that needs to be addressed in order to express that in the squat pattern. You're not training a fully lengthened quad in a squat. There's no way to do it.
Right. But if I, for example, back to your example, if I internally rotate, for example, it doesn't matter what other compensations I still try to fix. My femur is always going to hit my iliac crest, and it's always going to force me to get a posterior pelvic tilt, which is actually going to take away from my quad lengthening.
It's
because
not if
now
you
I'm-
allow. It's not if you allow for knees and hips to break at the same time, where you stay in midfoot.
Right.
That would be the differentials in our arguments. If you stay in midfoot, you're not going to see that interference happen.
Right.
So
Well, that's definitely a good perspective, man. I appreciate.
Yeah, it's just differentials.
is your argument I'm talking about like you being limiting here and him limiting here less growth potential or more risk of injury potential?
More risk of injury potential.
That's what it is.
Yeah. It
I
may.
would argue.
Yeah, we should shut up and drink.
I would argue.
I do. I am in like the middle of my
Lift
leg
heavy
training.
shit, get big quads.
So when we ask the question, should we be squatting, and we talk about the iterations of the squat pattern we can use, typically the last one you're going to talk about is a reverse banded hack or a pendulum squat. I do prefer the pendulum squat for a couple reasons. First off, the load tapering into the bottom, so it allows you to kind of train owning that bottom position without the maximal weight and the whole being kind of the rate limiting factor. And it puts you in an externally stabilized position with a full back pad. The key thing here would be finding a back pad that goes all the way through to your hips, so that you can have a setup that's not going to preset you into an anterior pelvic tilt, which is going to cause issues kind of referring back to the tin can model we've talked about in the past. So this is going to be the last in the Canyon squat. A lot of this is going to be derived from the barbell back squat and your Bulgarian split squat variation that you choose, and how that presents is a squat pattern that you can output maximally on, stay in mid-foot, and make sure that you get the most out of your squatting within your session. And guys, this is the end of the video for today. We started with the 7 sets of shoulders, 3 sets of tricep, and then knocked out our leg volume for the day. We'll come back and do push in 2 days, and then we'll also do another leg session in 3. So it'll be a mixture between hamstrings and quads with bicep work in the beginning. So pretty different split setup, but one that I'm really enjoying for the specificity of what I need. So make sure you guys like the video, comment below with any questions you have, subscribe to the channel for more content coming your way. And until next time, no off switch in the results.